It's the diary of a tired black man. Hey, it's the diary of a tired black man.
Peace, family. It's your boy Fonzie Neutral, representing for BattleOnline.com. You tapped into the DOATBM, Diary of a Tired Black Man podcast. And this week, we're back once again with a guest. And it's a guest that isn't no stranger to the show. He's actually one of the first early members that we used to have on quite regularly. You know, definitely good to have you back on the platform. What's good with you, D?
Yeah, man. Thanks for inviting me back, man. I'm glad to be here, man. Looking to chop it up and make some real good content today. So that's what's up.
No doubt, man. I mean, we've been pushing forward with different conversations within the diaspora, you know, just looking at different issues that afflict and affect the community. Some social issues, some pop culture issues and stuff. But one of the things that has struck a chord with me myself recently is, obviously, you know, I spend a lot of time online, obviously in the media and stuff. And one of the things that's really quite interesting is like every time I see a promotional campaign from certain companies, a lot of them nowadays have mixed couples on there, which is one thing. So almost every time you do and you go into the comments section, it's sort of like, you know, there's going to be an array of, let's say, outlandish comments. 9 times out of 10, they're all sort of, you know, racially motivated. There's a lot of publications now that are promoting, you know, universities. I saw one with Specsavers, for instance, and they had like an Asian girl on the front, and same sort of thing. You go to the comments, and the comments section is inundated with people saying, hey, you know, you guys are ticking boxes. Hey, what about us? You guys are trying to get rid of us. And this is coming from predominantly white people within the UK. So it had me thinking, you know, and recently I had a trip around to Nottingham. I want to say condolences to those guys who lost their lives in Nottingham in that recent tragedy. And while I was there, just spending some time around the environment, it was quite interesting to me because I didn't actually feel there was as much, I don't say outward racism or kind of visual sort of racism or that you can get sometimes as a black person when you travel around the UK. So I thought what could be an interesting topic for us to discuss this week is looking at just areas within the UK and what it's like for black people, you know, just traveling around or living around the UK, what sort of experiences they might feel, what places they might have, you know, some issues or maybe no issues whatsoever. So I just want to kind of explore that vein of conversation. I know yourself, you've traveled and lived around, so I thought it'd be a good one for us to chop it up with.
Absolutely. I mean, me personally, a bit of my background story, I've lived in some of the whitest areas you can ever imagine. I've lived in the sort of most multicultural areas you've ever imagined. So I've been on both sides of the fence. So because of my experience and my upbringing, I feel I'm in a good position to judge and talk about this kind of thing because I've been on both sides of the fence and I've experienced a lot of things. And I've got a lot of things to talk about from my past. So I think this is a very interesting topic to speak about as well. You know, and obviously race is, as it always is at the forefront of our society. It's a constant topic, whether you're talking about, you know, in the UK or the US, it's always something that's in the media. You know, it's always something that's debated. You know, and obviously you alluded to it earlier. The media are now starting to push mixed race couples in the media. They're starting to push more people from ethnic minorities in the media, and it's obviously by design. It's deliberate. We know that. So it's an interesting thing. But you know, obviously, you know, you went to Nottingham. City I've been to a couple of times, but I don't know it that well. But I know Birmingham well. I know London well. And one thing that's clear to me about Birmingham is that, yes, it's a very multicultural city. You know, I think it's one of the cities in the UK that has, you know, one of the highest ethnic minority populations, percentages. But it's clear that even though it's a very multicultural city, we know that, I mean, recently a lot of Eritreans have come into Birmingham recently. That's like the new group who's kind of coming to the city recently. And even though Birmingham's very multicultural, it's still to some extent divided. Like the Asian community generally, you know, stay together. You know, the white community stay together, and the black community as well. And you know, a perfect illustration of this is if you were to visit Star City on a busy day or a busy night. You go there, every single fringe group is people hanging out with their own kind. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Naturally, people gravitate towards their own kind. people are more comfortable with their own kind, and people have a right to hang out with whoever they want to. So I'm not just saying that's a bad thing or it needs to be changed. It's just a clear observation I've made. Whereas when you go to other cities, sometimes you see like a group of friends and it's like a mixed group, you know, people from different backgrounds all hanging out together at the bar drinking. Whereas in Birmingham, I think it's more separate. That's something that I've noticed. Whereas in somewhere in London, where I used to live for 4 years, it's a lot more mixed and integrated. This is a clear observation I've made myself.
Okay. Yeah, you know, that's definitely a great point. And I mean, I just want to add on to that because, you know, you mentioned my trip to Nottingham, and even from what you just said, I would have to concur that I found that similarly, just from observing and just from being there, I saw so many different groups of people that were quite multicultural groups, and they, you know, they didn't seem like it was any kind of issue. Whereas, as you said, with Birmingham and certain other cities within the UK, there is more of that direct segregation or separation in a lot of ways. You know, you usually see, as you mentioned, like Star City and stuff like that, it's predominantly, you know, the Asians will stick to their groups, you know, the Muslims will stick to their groups and stuff like that. And, you know, I guess there are occasional breakoffs, but I feel as though in some places it's more frowned at, it's more looked upon. Now, we did mention just like the publicization of certain things now being pushed by the modern media, which, as you said, is by design. And, you know, you can have different ways of looking at it. Is it being done to promote more inclusivity and things of that nature? I was actually part of a documentary that was shot a few years ago, maybe in 2012, which was about diversity within the UK, and it primarily focused on Birmingham, and it did look at some statistics saying like by 2024, which is quite strange because we're approaching those times now, that Birmingham will be, you know, quite a plural city and mixed in a lot of different ways and capacity. So when I'm seeing like some of this stuff online and I'm looking, as I said, you know, a lot of the negative comments that people are leaving in regards to certain posts, I see there's a lot of people that have their backs up about feeling, I guess, as though they're being, can't really say whitened out, but...
You're breaking up a bit. You're breaking up. I can't hear you. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you're breaking up a bit. I'm hearing some parts of it and then... so I missed a little bit of what you just said then, because it kind of just paused.
Okay, bear with me. So how will be? Is the audio any better now?
Yeah, that's fine. It's fine now, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know sometimes there is a few slight technicals, but hopefully it will clear itself out when it saves and transcodes. But yeah, I was just saying, you know, with that sort of rundown of things, and I'm seeing online, I was saying a lot of people being negative in regards to a lot of these campaigns and stuff. And I wanted to look at some of our experiences because, you know, I mentioned Nottingham yourself, you mentioned seeing it from both sides of the spectrum. So in terms of like some of the quote unquote white areas or neighborhoods that you've grown up in, what would you say the climate was like and the experience like for yourself?
If I be honest, it was quite a negative experience. When I was very young, it wasn't so bad at primary school because it was an RAF school. Both primary schools I went to in Germany and in England because they were RAF schools. It was like a little community, so all the dads knew each other. So my dad knew lots of the other dads, so it was like a mini community. So it wasn't so bad. But when I went to started secondary school at the grammar school, you know, it was quite a negative experience for me. And there was, people were quite openly hostile or racist in a way. And I do remember certain comments, certain quotes. Obviously, I'm not going to mention the guy's name, but I do remember in year 10, which for me would have been 2002, one guy said to me, and this is a quote, "In 65 years, I'm going to be a minority in my own country. That's why I'm racist." That's a quote that I remember him saying 21 years ago now. And that wasn't the only quote that I heard. So I think a lot of people from the white British community, they feel that they're being they're becoming, the numbers are becoming less in the UK. They're being replaced by groups of people who may not look like them, and their future generations, their grandkids or whatever, will be minorities in the major cities and towns of the UK. That's quite a common thought that they have based on my experience at secondary school. Now, obviously, you can't openly say this in public. You can't come out in public and say that because obviously, you will be reprimanded if you make comments like that. But that's a mindset that many people have. And that's why you were talking about the comments section earlier, when you see like an advertisement on TV or whatever, or on YouTube,
All
you look
you
at the
got to do is
comments,
go to the
people
comments.
are against that. Exactly. As you said, you look at the comments and you can see that. So that kind of alludes to the mindset that many people have. So me personally, I feel more confident in a multicultural environment. I feel that I fit in better there. I settle in better there. And that's where I've chosen to be. That's why one of the reasons why I chose to move to the West Midlands and start my career back in 2013, 10 years ago now. So I've, like I say at the start, I've been on both sides of the spectrum. I understand that people want to preserve, their own heritage. I fully understand that. But I'm also of the mindset that we are all human. And, if you're born in Britain, your skin color might be different, but your mindset is not necessarily going to be different. You're still going to speak the same, have the same kind of hobbies, have the same kind of, things that you do on a day-to-day basis. Your skin color might be different, but that's the only difference. So that's my opinion on it. But yeah.
I mean, definitely great point. One of the things that it springs to mind to myself is, it's one thing, I guess, people feeling as though that they're being replaced or they've got to preserve their own sort of culture and their own sort of, I guess, genetic breakup. Yeah, are you back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, yeah. I was just saying, I think it's one thing people thinking they got to preserve their own sort of genetic makeup, but it's another thing them expressing outward racism because, when I mention the comments and some stuff like that, I see some people in there saying stuff like, oh, well, you guys are ticking boxes, or we feel as though, where's the stuff for the white man and things of that nature. But then you have other people who are posting like blatantly racist things like, oh, animals, send them back on the boat, all that sort of stuff. So I say all that to say this, because you just made a point about being born in the UK, you should be treated still like a UK citizen. Do you feel though being a black person within the UK, you are, deemed at or looked at as British and still given that same sort of treatment and acceptance? Or do you think that it's just kind of like a fallacy where ultimately they look at you like that black lady that went to the royal thing and they said, where are you from? And she said, Hackney or London, wherever it was. They said, no, where are you really from,
Yeah, well, for me personally, I look at my experience now, and it's a very positive one, I have to say, because I live in just outside Birmingham now, and life is blessed. It's not as multicultural. Where I live now is not quite as multicultural as where I was living in Birmingham, but it's blessed. There's no issues, and the company I currently work for is predominantly white company, and they've all treated me well. There've been no issues, and that's partly because of the fact that I'm doing my job to a very good standard. But it's ultimately, I personally judge people for the character, and the people I work with now treat me very well. My skin color might be different, but they recognize me as a good person and a good worker for the company, the asset. So it's not all negative. My current situation is a very positive one. But I do think a lot of people, not necessarily my situation now, but even if you're born in Britain, but your grandparents are from somewhere else, they won't never look at you as British, even if you sound as English as the Queen. Or the king, I should say now. They'll never look at you as British just because your skin color is not the same, And I've always felt that, and I think some people probably, if they were honest, would admit that. Again, what people say in the public and what people say behind closed doors will be different. If you had like a hidden microphone on someone and they were giving their honest views behind closed doors, behind the curtains, what they say then would be very different to what they would say if they knew there were cameras there, or if they knew it was a public forum or something where they know they could be identified, So that's one thing we have to take into account as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, one thing that springs to mind off those points and sort of just building on it, adding on to that, I had a meeting not too long ago with somebody from London, and we got into just discussing some of the politics that is happening around the UK and just some of the socio makeups of the cities. And one of the things that came up was a similar conversation with myself, and they're a white British female. And they said in what they have noticed, and when I was talking about some cities that may have higher populaces of white people, but there might be less racism in some cases. Whereas when you go to a city that's probably like Birmingham, where it would be deemed as more multicultural, there's actually more racism, and not just from white people. There's racism from the, other groups as well, Asian groups and stuff as well. But do you think that it's like a territorial thing when there's like, more of certain groups, and then there's more of another group, and then people start feeling some type of way, as opposed to if you're in a neighborhood or an area where maybe you're the minority, but as you said, you sort of fit in and you don't sort of do anything that sort of rocks the boat? Do you think there's more of an acceptance overall in that sense?
Absolutely. I feel certain groups may feel threatened if they've been the predominant group in an area for a number of years or decades or whatever, and then suddenly another ethnic group comes in, and they may feel threatened, whatever that ethnic group is. Whereas you go to a city where there's maybe a high percentage of one particular ethnic group that dominates, they don't feel threatened because they are the predominant group, and there's not enough of any other ethnic group to subjugate them, to oppress them, to do anything bad to them. So if there's there's one dominant group there, they might be less racist because they are so far in the majority that there's no other group that's going to threaten them, that's going to do anything to them, because they are the dominant force there. So yes, to answer your question, there may be a situation where somewhere that's more multicultural and becoming more multicultural each year, there may be more racism there from any ethnic group as well. So yes, that's what I think to your question. Yeah, good question as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a good answer. You definitely made some great points, and it's quite interesting when we look at it like that, and just I guess how much fear plays a part into how people treat others. Sometimes fear isn't even necessarily true; it's false evidence appearing real. But if people feel as though all these black people, they're going to try and take over, or they're going to try and do to us what we may do to them, and sometimes you get a lot of mindsets that aren't necessarily true, but down to people's fear, it can make them act out in a certain type of way. Another point I found very interesting, and this was sort of extended on from the conversation I was having the other day with a friend of mine, and we were just speaking on how things are in London, and she sort of alluded to that. I guess a lot of the English nationals feel some type of way about the current state of England politics with your Rishi Sunaks, your Priti Patels, Suella Braverman. Now myself, I'm particularly no fan of them because I know personally I feel as though they display a lot of anti-blackness in some of their policies and just in sort of their ways that I've seen them approach certain things. They practice and showcase a lot of anti-black racism. But this lady was an English lady. She sort of, was like, hey, we talk about diversity and stuff in the UK. Look who's sort of running the shop now. And she was saying for English white people, they're feeling ostracized from, I guess, that sort of element that's in the political standpoint. Now, I think that's twofold because I always feel as though there is a lot of white British that, advocate and support like the Asian community and stuff as well. But now we're starting to see some of them are feeling as though they're being pushed out. Now, you made a great point where you said if people are used to a place being predominantly them for a while, and, let's say England, people can sit there and say, okay, well, maybe there was the black man here before the cheddar man or whatever and all this other stuff, or they can say this, that, and the third. But ultimately, we look at England as a white country, as a white nation. So would you say they're justified to potentially feel that way when they see the political landscape changing so much and seeing, I guess, the Asian community sort of moving in and expanding a lot more? Because some people are saying they feel as though they have the control within England now at the minute.
Well, it's interesting because from the 2021 census, obviously the Asian population is now the biggest, well, have been for a while, the biggest ethnic minority group in the UK. There are 11%, I believe, and the black community is 5%. So obviously, in terms of numbers, they are growing force. And I think there's actually a phenomenon called white flight. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's where like the white people used to be the predominant group, but when ethnic minority moves into that area and start to grow, white people then deliberately leave to essentially get away from these ethnic minorities. It's called white flight, and that's a phenomenon that's been happening in London for 30 years now. So you get in a situation where those white people are leaving, and that's leaving more space for the ethnic minority groups to come in. So I do think that the white English, the white British community, are not happy with the current situation in terms of, you know, both the number and the power that certain other groups are having in the UK at the moment, which is why they're leaving those areas. Say, for example, I use London because I used to live in London. So I use that example. Then I'm leaving London now, in London, they're moving to areas just outside of London, like Essex, Kent.
Oh, wow.
Those kind of areas, you know, just outside of London, just kind of moving away from the minorities. But yes, I think a lot of people are threatened by the changing landscape, shall we say, of the UK. So obviously, you know, the ethnic minority numbers are growing rapidly through immigration and higher birth rates. And obviously, you have Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister. So you have an Asian, first Indian Prime Minister. So yeah, I do think a lot of white British people are not happy with the current situation, which is why you are seeing, you know, the anti-migrant protests all across the UK at the moment. You're seeing certain right-wing groups starting to gain more numbers, although I don't think they'll ever be significant enough to make a difference. So yeah, it's interesting times ahead. It's interesting to see what will happen in the next 10 years, because I do believe that the ethnic minority population of the UK will continue to grow. So it's one of those situations where
I believe so.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see that as the ethnic minority groups grows, and then the white British population, as a result of that, therefore reduces in terms of percentage, what will be the reaction? Because I want us living in Britain to live in harmony. But I do know that it's going to cause tensions in the future. It's inevitable. I know a mixed race guy. His dad's side's from the Caribbean. His mum's side's white British, you know, and he's alluded to me that, you know, his white Anglo-Saxon side of his family, his words, my white Anglo-Saxon side of my family, I've had enough. He's a mixed race guy, and that's what he said to me. And, you know, I don't believe it's just his family that's had enough. I think a lot of people have. No, so I think I want us all to live in harmony, but I think it's inevitable that when a group, let's say the white British group, has been the predominant race in the UK for centuries, when their power may start to dwindle and their numbers or percentage starts to dwindle, then there's going to be some kind of animosity. I think that's what you'll see in the next few decades.
Oh yeah, I mean, my thoughts on that before we wind down is I definitely would like to live in a world of harmony and stuff. Also, albeit I do feel as though it could be I don't say a sense of naivety just with how the world is. We know it offers, you know, with good comes bad, with light comes dark, with, you know, even the scripture tells us there's a time for war, there's a time for peace, you know, there's a time for everything. So I do feel ultimately that there will be some kind of blow up before things sort of simmer down. And you know, as we observe just things that are happening, it's like I was saying, just, you know, once again going back to some of the comments we see, and sometimes, you know, we can make light of it and say, oh, but you see some very disturbing comments from some people as well. It shows they have a malevolent side of them, and a really strong sense of disdain for whether it be black people, whether it be Asian people, whether it be, you know, somebody else for whatever reason. So we do look at things like that and say, okay, there is going to be a lot of hostility. There is a lot of hostility. I mean, a few years ago, we actually was part of a mini documentary that we looked at immigration and stuff as well. Even if we're looking at that now, and as you said, we're seeing more, even just within that conversation of just, you know, the migrant issues, and there's certain areas now within the UK that isn't just as, when we was young, like growing up in the UK, it was kind of like a bug out for us to think like, okay, if we was going to go live in a certain white area, we knew it was problems. It was guaranteed. But we could, like, even as kids, like, for instance, in an area called King's Standing in Birmingham, you know, we had the opportunity. We was like, hell no, we don't want to live there, because we know in those kind of times, especially the 70s and the 80s, if you was black in certain white areas, it was a problem. You know, But I say all that to say at that time, it was only sort of, I don't want to just say a black and white thing, but within England, that was sort of the big issue. The Asian community was there, and the black community sort of backed them up a lot in the early days before they sort of turned in a lot of ways. And then they had issues with black people themselves. But now we have so many other different nations coming in. You go some places, you got your Romanians, you got your Polish, you got your Ukrainians, you know, all sorts of Eastern Europeans, you know, loads. You got some migrants from Africa and stuff, but ultimately Somalians. Somebody was telling me the other day, even in Birmingham, in some areas you can't even go without it being a beef with the Somalians and all that stuff. And so I say all that to say there's so much additional people coming in now, and people have their own ways of understanding. Some people are coming from like places where to them there isn't any rational way of probably solving things. If it becomes a problem, you know, they're more likely to turn to violence and stuff, you know. So it's definitely an interesting sort of mixing pot that the UK is becoming now.
I mean, it's interesting to note that the first minority group of colour to come to the UK was the Caribbean community. In the Windrush generation from 1950.
I want to say, peace to the Windrush family. We're currently observing the Windrush month here in the UK, and peace to the US family who are observing Juneteenth also, you know, Juneteenth, June 19th, but we're continuing the celebration all month long. Sorry, brother, you can carry on.
Absolutely. So obviously our grandparents came over in 1957 to be exact. So they were part of that Windrush generation, the Caribbean community. We were the first, you know, minority group, non-white in numbers to come to the UK. But it's interesting to note now that we are, in terms of numbers now, we Caribbean community are way down now. There's more Africans in the UK now. There's more Indians in the UK now. There's more Pakistanis in the UK now. There's more East Europeans in the UK now. So we were the first ones to come in the 50s, and now we're not even top 4, top 5 anymore. Nice. So it just showing you. This is from the 2021 census 2 years ago. So it's just showing you how Britain is such a melting pot, how the demographics have changed so drastically, probably over the last 20 years, really, since Tony Blair came to power in the late 90s. And the demographics will continue to change over the next 20 or so years as well. But it's such an interesting observation now. Obviously that some would argue that's to be expected because the population of the Caribbean overall is a lot smaller than India, Pakistan, Africa, etc. So some would argue, well, that's obvious. But it's just something interesting I've noticed. Because I study demographics. I study demographics quite closely. With the census comes out every 10 years, so 91, 2001, 2011, etc., etc. So I always look at the census, not just in terms of ethnicity, but in terms of everything. I always observe the census. Economic, exactly. I always look at the census every time the government releases the results and just think, interesting how things have changed from 10 years previously. But that's just something I've noticed. Obviously, being from a Caribbean background ourselves, it's an interesting observation to make.
Of course, it's a great point. We're running out of time. We definitely want to know you guys' thoughts also in the comments. I just want to say, for some of my final thoughts on this, and I know there's so much other areas we could go into. I do feel personally, like I said at the beginning, I'm all for, the harmony and everybody coming together and mixing. But I wouldn't be myself if I wasn't honest and say personally with some of my own experiences and from what I've seen, and even like you said, from what your friend said, that was mixed race and just different people's things that they've told me from their own experiences and that I've seen. I personally now have very strong reservations about potentially even mixing with somebody of another race. We could be fine, we could be friends and stuff, we could but that's just me personally, and some might say that's a shame, but that's just from the way that I see the world moving. Now, some people say, okay, you got to be different, you got to be the change and stuff like that. But me, I get enough grief as it is just being a black man, let alone if I'm going to, take on some extra grief like that. So it's a crazy fight, but we got a couple more minutes. You got any more thoughts on that note?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a whole new topic. We can start on that, but what you just alluded to there, absolutely, is about the mixing of different races, and a lot of people seeing it as a polluting of their gene pool. So as you just said, then people are like, oh, you can be friends with someone of a different race, but when it goes any further than that, in terms of actually having kids with someone of a different race, their family or their community is like, no, you're polluting our gene pool forever. The one drop rule and all that kind of thing, which we all know about. But, to close down, I would say that, it is possible for races to live in harmony with each other. And a good example of that is a country like Brazil. Brazil is a very multicultural country, I should say, as a result of the Europeans going there, the indigenous groups there, the African slaves who went there. Brazil is the ultimate melting pot in the world, I'd say. And from the small amount of research I've done in Brazil, they kind of live in harmony with each other. You know, there's no major issues in Brazil. Obviously, I've not been to Brazil myself. I'm just talking from an outside perspective. But it is possible for different ethnic groups to live together, you know, in one community.
No doubt. So, guys, I know there's a lot of passport bros out there. Let us know if you'd tapped to Brazil. We're definitely going to chime back in and pick up on some of this conversation. It's been a pleasure. Your boy finds a neutron, DOATBM. Do join us on BackThatOnline.com for more drops, news, and updates. Peace.
It's the diary of a tired black man. It's the diary of a tired